Two boat owners can run identical outboards in the same waters with the same fuel and end up with completely different engines a decade later. One reaches 5,000 hours and starts on the first turn every time. The other watches a 6-year-old powerhead die on a quote sheet that reads $7,000. The hardware is the same, the maintenance schedule in the manual is the same. So what separates the engine that lasts from the engine that does not? The answer is not a secret tool, an insider part, or a manufacturer trick. It comes down to 5 quiet habits that experienced marine mechanics practice on their own engines every season, and that the average owner has never heard of. The owner's manual will not mention them. The dealership service department will not volunteer them. By the end of this video, you will know what those habits are, and why most boat owners will spend their entire boating lives without ever discovering them. When a customer walks into a marine showroom in 2026 and stands in front of a new outboard, they are looking at one of the most aggressively marketed products in the entire recreational vehicle industry. A modern Yamaha F300, a Mercury Verado, a Suzuki DF350, each wears the same promise. Decades of reliability, whisper-quiet operation, precision fuel mapping, and cold start performance that rivals any luxury automobile. Marine industry advertising frames the outboard as a near-permanent investment, with brochures describing engines built to thrive in the most punishing operating environment on the planet: saltwater, heat cycling, vibration, and combustion at full load for hours at a time. The message is consistent across every manufacturer. Buy this engine, follow the manual, and it will outlast the boat you bolt it to. The numbers seem to support the promise. A new 4-stroke from any major manufacturer carries a manufacturer-suggested retail price between $15,000 and $40,000, depending on horsepower, with warranty coverage now extending to 5 years on most flagship engines. Service intervals have been stretched, oil changes are advertised at 100-hour intervals, and the engineering specifications include corrosion-resistant alloys, electronic fuel injection, water-resistant electrical connections, sealed wiring harnesses, and digital throttle control. The boat owner walks out of the showroom with a financing contract, a bound owner's manual, and a quiet confidence that they have purchased a machine designed to last decades. The marketing is not lying. The technology is real, and modern outboards genuinely are more efficient, more powerful, and more sophisticated than anything that came before them. A Yamaha representative once told a regional boating club that with proper maintenance, the company's outboard should last between 9,000 and 12,000 hours before serious concerns surface. Commercial operators in Alaska routinely report 10,000 hours on Yamaha 4-strokes powering charter fleets, and OX 66 2-strokes from the late 1990s are still running in the Caribbean with over 3,000 commercial hours on the clock. The hardware is genuinely capable of delivering on the promise. The maintenance schedule in the owner's manual reinforces the confidence. It tells you to change the engine oil every 100 hours or annually, inspect the fuel filter, check the lower unit oil, replace the impeller every 3 years, swap the spark plugs at the recommended interval, flush the engine after saltwater use, and inspect the anodes periodically. Most owners read this list and conclude that following it should produce the lifespan the marketing promised. They take their boat in for annual service, hand over a credit card, drive home with a serviced engine, and assume they have done their part of the bargain. For the first 2 years, the engine performs exactly as advertised, with easy starts, a smooth idle, and fuel economy that matches the brochure numbers. The owner begins to relax into ownership, makes plans for longer trips, invests in accessories, and tells their friends about the brand. They are now operating on the assumption that the engine they bought will last, because the manufacturer told them it would, and because the early evidence appears to support the claim. Somewhere in the 3rd or 4th year, something quiet begins to change. Cold starts become slightly harder, the idle gets just a touch rougher, and the top end feels marginally slower than it used to. The owner makes mental adjustments without realizing they are making them, blaming the weather, blaming the fuel, telling themselves the engine is simply breaking in differently. The promise is starting to crack, but the cracks are forming so slowly that nobody notices yet. The cracks always start in the fuel system. By year 3 or 4 of ownership, the gasoline that has been cycling through the engine has carried with it a slow accumulation of moisture, ethanol residue, and microscopic deposits that the average owner never sees, and the annual service rarely catches. Modern pump fuel in the United States is required by federal regulation to contain up to 10% ethanol, and ethanol is hygroscopic, meaning it pulls water out of the air and carries it directly into your fuel system. In a car, this barely matters because the fuel is consumed quickly and the engine runs daily. In a boat that sits for weeks between uses, the consequences accumulate season after season. Independent marine technicians and industry sources consistently report that the vast majority of outboard engine problems they see in their service bays today are related to fuel or to the battery. Modern fuel can begin to deteriorate and oxidize in as little as 15 days, which means the gasoline you put in last month is no longer the same gasoline running through your injectors today. Ethanol attracts water, water separates from the fuel in a process called phase separation, and the resulting layer of water and ethanol sludge sits at the bottom of the tank waiting to be drawn into the engine. Once it reaches the injectors or the carburetor, it begins to varnish the precision metering surfaces that control combustion. The damage is invisible. The symptoms are subtle. The cost compounds quietly. This is where the gap between owner maintenance and mechanic maintenance opens for the first time. The owner believes they are doing everything right because they followed the schedule in the manual. They had the engine serviced last spring. They paid the bill. They drove home with a clean receipt. But the manual schedule is a minimum, not a maximum. And it was written for the average user under average conditions. The mechanic working on his own engine is doing things the manual never asked the owner to do. The same gap appears in the cooling system. The owner assumes the impeller is fine because the manual says it should last 3 years. The mechanic knows that an impeller sitting unused in cold storage develops a memory in its rubber veins, that the heat and cool cycles of a long boating season harden the rubber, and that the failure mode is sudden rather than gradual. When an impeller fails, it does not slowly reduce flow. It shreds, and the fragments travel through the cooling passages and lodge in places that require a complete cooling system disassembly to clear. The owner who waits 3 years gambles. The mechanic who replaces the impeller every season pays $20 to remove the gamble entirely. The lower unit follows the same logic. The manual says to change the gear oil annually, and the owner does. But the mechanic knows that simply pulling the drain plug and refilling does not address the real long-term threat, which is the slow seizing of the lower unit mounting bolts and the gradual deterioration of the driveshaft splines. A lower unit that has not been removed for 5 years develops corrosion at the mounting bolts that turns a 30-minute job into a torch and chisel emergency repair when something finally needs replacing. The mechanic drops the lower unit annually, whether or not anything is wrong with it, because removing it once a year is the only way to keep it removable forever. The owner does not know any of this. The manual does not mention it. The dealership service department, charging by the hour, has no incentive to volunteer it. The engine continues to run. The owner continues to enjoy the boat, and the cracks continue to spread underneath, invisibly, season after season. By year 5 or 6, the engine that started its life as a marketing promise begins to cost real money. The owner takes the boat in for what they expect to be a routine service, and the technician returns with a list. The lower unit oil came out cloudy, suggesting a seal failure that was not caught last year. The compression numbers are uneven across the cylinders, with one reading 15% below the others. The water pump impeller has degraded to the point where it is shedding small pieces of rubber into the cooling passages. The anodes are nearly gone, which means the engine itself has been absorbing the galvanic corrosion that the anodes were designed to prevent. The owner stares at the estimate. The number is somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 depending on what gets repaired now versus what gets postponed. This is the financial collapse of the promise. And it does not happen because the owner failed to maintain the engine. It happens because the owner maintained the engine according to the manual, while the engine was actually built for a more aggressive maintenance regime that the manual never described. The 5 quiet habits that the experienced mechanic practices on his own engine are the difference between a 5,000-hour outboard and a 1,000-hour repair quote. They are not secret. They are not advanced. They are simply not in the document the customer was handed at the showroom. The first habit is fogging the cylinders before any extended storage period. Fogging oil is a wax-based coating that gets sprayed directly into the combustion chambers, where it adheres to the cylinder walls, the piston rings, and the valves. Surface rust forms within weeks on cool, exposed metal during storage. When the engine is started for the first time after a stored season, that thin layer of rust scrapes across the rings and the cylinder walls, etching the precision crosshatch that seals compression. Mercury Marine, Yamaha, and Quicksilver all officially recommend fogging in their service procedures. A $10 can of fogging oil and 20 minutes of work prevents a powerhead rebuild that runs between $2,500 and $6,500. The owner skips it. The mechanic never does. The second habit is replacing the impeller on a calendar schedule rather than waiting for failure. The official intervals vary by manufacturer, with Mercury suggesting every 3 years or 300 hours, and Yamaha recommending annually or every 100 hours. Charter operators and saltwater commercial users replace impellers every season without exception, because the cost of a $20 part is nothing compared to the cost of a blown head gasket or a warped cylinder caused by overheating. The owner assumes the impeller is fine because there is still water coming out of the telltale. The mechanic knows that a worn impeller can pump enough water to satisfy the telltale and still not move enough volume to cool the engine under load. The third habit is dropping the lower unit annually whether or not the impeller is being replaced. This single act of preventive disassembly accomplishes 3 things at once. It breaks loose the mounting bolts before salt water can seize them permanently. It allows fresh marine grease to be applied to the drive shaft splines, which prevents the catastrophic spline wear that leads to drive failure. And it gives the mechanic a chance to visually inspect components that are otherwise hidden, including the water pump housing, the shift linkage, and the upper gear case seals. The owner who never drops the lower unit is borrowing future repair bills against present convenience. The mechanic pays the 30 minutes every year to keep the next decade affordable. The fourth habit is replacing the sacrificial anodes when they are 50% worn rather than waiting for them to disappear entirely. Mercury Marine officially specifies the 50% threshold in its own service documentation, and yet the average boat owner does not even know where their anodes are located. Anodes are small blocks of zinc, aluminum, or magnesium bolted to the outside of the outboard for one specific purpose. They corrode on behalf of the engine, attracting the galvanic activity that would otherwise consume the more expensive metals around them. When an anode wears down to half its original size, it is approaching the end of its protective life. When it is fully eroded, the engine itself becomes the sacrifice. The damage from missed anode replacement is invisible until it is catastrophic. The corrosion begins on the midsection housing, the piece of aluminum that connects the power head to the lower unit. Honda has documented midsection corrosion issues on its 200 and 225 horsepower models that have caused real headaches for owners and mechanics alike, with some engines reaching the point where the structural housing has to be replaced entirely because the metal is no longer sound. A complete midsection replacement on a larger outboard runs into the thousands of dollars, and on certain models the most economical fix is to replace the entire engine. A mechanic checks his anodes every spring and replaces them at the halfway point, because a $30 set of anodes is the cheapest insurance available in marine ownership. The owner who never checked them learns about anodes only when the dealer's repair quote explains where the previous set went. The fifth habit is the one that most directly addresses the fuel system damage that started the whole collapse. The mechanic uses a marine-grade fuel stabilizer in every tank of fuel every time year-round, regardless of how often the boat is used. The owner uses stabilizer only when storing the boat for winter, if they remember at all. The difference compounds across years. Stabilizer prevents the oxidation that turns gasoline into varnish. It blocks the phase separation that allows water and ethanol to settle out of the fuel. And it protects the precision metering surfaces inside the injectors and the carburetor from the deposits that gradually choke fuel delivery and force the engine to run lean, hot, and stressed. A bottle of marine fuel stabilizer costs around $15 and treats hundreds of gallons of gasoline. A fuel system overhaul on a modern outboard, including injector replacement and carburetor service, runs from $800 to over $2,000 depending on the engine and the extent of the damage. These 5 habits, fogging before storage, replacing the impeller on schedule, dropping the lower unit annually, replacing anodes at 50% wear, and stabilizing every tank of fuel, are not glamorous. They are not in the manual. They cost a combined total of less than $100 per year and require less than 4 hours of work spread across the boating season. The mechanic doing this on his own engine considers it routine the same way a careful driver checks tire pressure or a pilot inspects fuel before takeoff. The owner who skips them does not know they are gambling. They follow the manual, they pay for annual service, and they trust that the system as designed will keep them safe. The system as designed does not keep them safe. The manual was written to satisfy warranty requirements, not to maximize engine longevity. The annual service the owner pays for accomplishes the line items the dealership is contractually obligated to perform, not the deeper maintenance that would actually extend the engine's working life. The collapse is not bad luck. It is the predictable result of a maintenance gap that nobody warned the owner about. The question that remains is the most important one. Why does the gap between owner maintenance and mechanic maintenance exist in the first place? Why does the manual, written by the same engineers who designed the engine, not include the 5 habits that the same engineers themselves would practice on their own outboards? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is something more ordinary and more difficult to fix. The marine industry has built a system where the manufacturer, the dealer, and the customer each have different incentives, and those incentives no longer point in the same direction. The manufacturer designs the engine to last as long as the warranty period requires, plus a reasonable margin for reputation. The manual is written to define what the customer must do to keep the warranty valid, not to define what they should do to maximize engine lifespan. Anything beyond the warranty window becomes the dealer's revenue opportunity, not the manufacturer's reputational concern. The dealer, in turn, builds a service business around scheduled visits priced by the hour, with little incentive to teach customers how to perform the cheap preventive work that would reduce the dealer's own service revenue. And the customer, trusting both the manufacturer and the dealer, follows the path of least resistance, paying for what they are told to pay for and assuming the rest is handled. This is why the 5 habits exist outside the official documentation. They are not secrets. They are simply outside the financial interest of the people writing the documentation. The mechanic who does this work on his own engine is operating on a different incentive structure entirely. He is not optimizing for warranty compliance or service revenue. He is optimizing for engine longevity, because the engine is his and the consequences of failure are personal. The good news is that nothing about these habits is locked behind expertise or specialized tools. Fogging an engine takes a $10 can of fogging oil and 20 minutes. Replacing an impeller is a 30-minute job with a service manual and a basic socket set. Dropping the lower unit annually requires nothing more than a bucket, a drain pan, and a willingness to reach for a torque wrench. Replacing anodes is straightforward enough that any owner with a screwdriver can do it. And adding fuel stabilizer to every tank requires no skill at all, only the discipline to keep a bottle in the boat at all times. Adopting these habits will not turn a recreational boater into a marine mechanic. It will simply close the gap that costs most owners thousands of dollars per decade in preventable repairs. The engine that was sold to last 12,000 hours will actually last 12,000 hours. The warranty period will end without surprise. The first major repair will arrive years later than it would have otherwise, and the resale value will reflect the difference. The future of outboard ownership will belong to the owners who stop trusting the system to take care of them and start practicing the habits that the people inside the system already practice on their own engines. The marine industry is not going to update the owner's manual. The dealership is not going to start teaching free preventive maintenance classes. The information has to come from somewhere outside the official channels, which is precisely where it has always lived. The next time you stand in front of your outboard, ask yourself one question. Are you maintaining this engine the way the manual told you to, or the way the mechanic working on his own boat would? The answer is the difference between the engine that delivers on the promise and the engine that becomes the repair quote.